Trustee Sullivan? Go ahead.
Good evening. This is a meeting of the Municipal Services Committee of the Board of Trustees of the Village of Wilmette. Staff will now call the roll.
Trustee Kennedy? Here. Trustee Kurzman?
Here.
Trustee Sullivan?
Here. So good evening, everyone. This meeting is being conducted remotely via Microsoft Teams. For those watching this video in the future, the state of Illinois is currently under a stay-at-home order issued by Governor J.B. Pritzker due to the coronavirus global pandemic. As a result, all in-person governmental meetings have been canceled. However, the Open Meetings Act now permits electronic meetings of government bodies like the Municipal Services Committee. And this evening, we are conducting our business in compliance with the state law. This meeting is being broadcast live on our local cable access channel 6. It is also being broadcast on the internet on YouTube Live, and the URL for that is www.youtube.com/user/villageofwilmette/live.
Mom, can I watch your channel?
I'm going to ask if everybody can just mute themselves. If you would like to participate in the meeting, you may use the Microsoft Teams app on the device for free. No sign-in required. The link to join each meeting is posted on the website calendar at wilmette.com/calendar. The meeting will be archived on the village website as we do with our other televised public meetings. A remote meeting requires a different mechanic for public participation. To ensure that our residents, business owners, and other interested parties have the opportunity to participate in this meeting, we have solicited public comment prior to the start of the meeting via email. If you send an email to publiccomment@wilmette.com prior to the start of the meeting, our staff will read the email during the public comment portion of our agenda. If members of the public who are watching the broadcast would like to participate during our designated public comment periods, you may submit your comments through YouTube Live at the appropriate time, and a member of the village staff will read your comment to the Municipal Services Committee. All comments to the Municipal Services Committee will be recorded in the meeting minutes as we typically do. Everyone will have joined the meeting today will be muted. When it is time for public comments, those joining us through Teams can toggle their mute status by clicking on the microphone icon on the meeting toolbar. Those joining us by audio conference dial-in can toggle to their mute status by pressing *6. Only attendees can unmute themselves. No one can unmute another attendee. And just a reminder that a public comment can also be provided by emailing publiccomment@wilmette.com or through the village YouTube live stream. Before the meeting, the Municipal Services Committee received a packet of agenda materials. These materials also are posted on wilmette.com, so the residents and other interested parties can review the very same materials that the Municipal Services Committee members received. This meeting packet contains the agenda, minutes of the last Municipal Services Committee meeting, 3 agenda items, and public comment. So now I'm going to move on to the agenda. So first was called to order. Our second item tonight is the approval of the minutes of our June 23rd, 2020 meeting of the Municipal Services Committee. Were there any comments, questions, updates on those minutes?
Yeah.
Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I move that we approve the minutes.
Thank you, Trustee Kennedy.
I will second the motion.
Thank you, Trustee Kurzman. Can we do a roll vote for that, or do you have to call that out, Bridget? And she's on mute, so.
Sorry, you can do just a unanimous vote on that. All those in favor?
Aye.
And the motion carries.
So number 3 is review and approval of the master bike and active transportation plan. And so I'm going to turn it over to.
Yeah. Thank you, trustees and guests and consultants. We appreciate you taking your time to talk to us tonight about the Master Bike and Active Transportation Plan. Tonight signifies a major milestone in the approval of the plan. This is the 3rd meeting after several years of public engagement. We've had 2 meetings with the Transportation Commission. The Commission approved the plan in August, and this is the next step at Municipal Services Committee, which is a committee of the Village Board, and the final step will be approval at the Village Board level. The most important thing, there's 2 important points actually I'd like to just remind everyone of. The first is that this is just a concept plan, very similar to the Village Center Master Plan. This plan is intended to be a starting point, not an ending point. So we fully expect that there will be changes as the plan proceeds through implementation. And what that will look like is, as the implementation plan is put forward to the Transportation Commission annually for review, and segments of bike accommodations are brought up for discussion, we will go out to the residents who live on those blocks and invite them to a meeting of the Transportation Commission to talk about the plan, talk about the type of treatment that's being recommended, and make sure that there really is neighborhood buy-in before there's actually an implementation of that bike network. So there will be additional steps, there will be additional opportunities to comment. Secondly, I think the Civil Tech team did a tremendous job putting together this plan. It's very challenging though. Wilmette is not a newer suburb. So we're an older, established, mature suburb with narrow streets, brick streets, mature trees lining our parkway, and a heavy reliance on on-street parking. With those challenges, I believe they did a really nice job working within those parameters and building a network that's also sensitive to the context that they were working in. So with that as a background, I'd like to introduce Jackie Henriksen and Heather Shady from, Jackie's with Civil Tech and Heather is with Active Transportation Alliance, and they partnered up to prepare the plan for us. So they're going to walk us through a brief presentation.
Great. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you so much. So my name is Heather Shady. I'm the Senior Planner with Active Transportation Alliance, and I'll be kicking off this presentation, followed by Jackie Henriksen, who is the project manager and works for Civil Tech. So we really appreciate the time the commissioners, the staff, and residents have put into this plan to date and also tonight, and we're excited to walk you through what we've proposed and what we're looking to accomplish with it. Next slide, please, Jackie. So very briefly, we'll talk through a little bit of the background on the project, discuss the role that the community played in helping us develop this plan, go through the recommendations, and our requested action tonight is for the commissioners to vote to accept the plan and send the plan to the village board for adoption. Next slide. So Bridget touched on this already, but we wanted to reiterate that this is a plan. It's not an engineering study. And so what a plan means versus what an engineering study means, there's kind of two levels. This plan is a roadmap that can help the village prioritize future projects when opportunities arise that are kind of synergistic with the recommendations. It can also help the village apply for grant applications if they're considering moving forward with one of the recommendations. And it provides concept level design. So these haven't been fully engineered or vetted. There's a lot that still needs to be explored, but we've looked at it at a high level in a little bit closer detail. And it seems most of the recommendations seem feasible, at least from a physical perspective. The plan sets out to create a village-wide look at transportation. So it's not at a corridor level or an intersection level. It's kind of thinking through how the whole village functions as a network and how pedestrians and bicyclists can safely and comfortably move through it. And it also sets a higher level vision and goals for the village to consider over time. So again, a plan is not design specific. We haven't gotten to the level of engineering specification. We haven't been able to do a full engineering feasibility study on any of the recommendations. That would need to be done in the future on a corridor by corridor or intersection by intersection basis. And it's of course not permanent or final, as Bridget mentioned. So before any recommendation that we've proposed in this plan is implemented, more engineering study will be needed and a lot of additional community engagement will happen to make sure that residents are fully on board with what's proposed and eventually designed. Next slide, please. So my organization, Active Transportation Alliance, is a nonprofit that advocates for walking, biking, and public transit throughout the Chicago region. So we deeply believe in the work we do, and I know Civil Tech does as well. And we know that there are tons of benefits to creating walking and biking supported communities. Everything from safety to environmental benefits abound if you're able to implement some of the recommendations and help make the community more walkable and bikeable. We've also seen a shift, I think, and I'm assuming the same is true in Wilmette since COVID-19, where more and more people are walking and biking more regularly in their communities. And I know we've heard from constituents from throughout Chicagoland that they're looking for more options and safer options to get around their communities. And sometimes they're finding them and sometimes aren't, as they've walked and biked more regularly since they're home more often. Next slide, please. So the plan, this is the contents of the plan. Again, we won't walk through it in detail tonight. I'm sure many of you have already read it, but we've tried to lay out every recommendation that we can and also give a good overview of what the community told us throughout the process. The plan includes both network recommendations, intersection recommendations, a guidance on how to develop more bike parking, and it also includes information on different initiatives that can be achieved. So as you're reading through the plan, there's sort of a comprehensive list of things that can be considered throughout the community, both from an infrastructure perspective and a non-infrastructure perspective. Next slide, please. So we've been working on this plan since May of 2018, and I want to point out that throughout this entire process, we've been really working closely with different facets of the community to get their ideas for what they'd like to see implemented in Wilmette, what they like about ideas, what they dislike about ideas. And every step of the way, we've worked together to try to identify priorities and also refine them with community members. So we've done lots of different activities, and we outline those in the next slide. So we've worked with residents in a variety of ways, both in person and online. We've hosted several tabling opportunities, including one at Summerfest a couple of years ago, and also one at Go Green Wilmette's gathering in March. We also held 2 open houses, 5 focus groups with different interest groups within the village. We hosted office hours where we talked to residents one-on-one about the plan recommendations. We, in addition, had lots of online engagement that we offered for community members who may not be able to attend a meeting or, had an idea that they wanted to shoot off in the middle of the night. So we held a project website where all the documents have been posted throughout the project. We invited residents to submit comments online through that website. We also had an interactive map that you see in the lower right-hand corner of our screen that shows all the dots that residents placed on it, telling us intersections they thought maybe needed to be improved, routes they wanted to see improved for biking or walking, or other issues they had related to transportation. Throughout the project, we communicated and updated residents through the village newsletters and also have a large and growing email distribution list from all the people we've spoken to. We did our best too to help people find out about the plan not online. I know that's more challenging these days, but we posted signs around the village letting people know about the open house, and we sent out mailers to all the residents that had a recommendation on their street or block. So next slide, please, Jackie. So throughout the course of the plan, we talked to at least 369 people that we have documented. And 91% of those people live in the village of Wilmette, which means that for the most part, the recommendations and ideas that we heard are reflective of the residents' goals and priorities. We heard about 111 individuals about different places that they found challenging or concerning in the community. And we also had 4,000 visitors to the project website since June. And again, that number is growing every time we send out a communication about the project. Next slide, please. So I just want to emphasize with this slide that the community, we really value community input, and the input from the community helped us evolve the plan over time. So in phase 1 of the project, where we were identifying the issues that the community members had, we took that opportunity to really listen to everything people were telling us and try to synthesize that into kind of high-level recommendations. So what we heard was that people are looking for a multimodal, context-sensitive community that's focused on people, accessibility, and safety. In phase 2, once we developed the recommendations for the plan, so we had this high-level concept, we took those identified priority areas, presented those to the community. At that point, we worked with the community to refine those recommendations. So we wanted to understand what the neighborhood and block level concerns were and make changes based on what people told us. We heard differing opinions about the best facility type. In some cases, people want trails everywhere, and in other cases, people want more bike lanes. So we kind of sifted through what was realistic and feasible that might be able to be adapted from our recommendations. We also heard the desire for more treatments and more locations, and again, tried to add those to the plan where possible. And in general, we heard a lot of support in phase 2 for projects. So people were excited about the recommendations. They wanted to see them happen. They wanted to know when they were happening. And so there's a lot of enthusiasm. Following development of the draft recommendations, we then presented the plan twice to the Transportation Commission, where we clarified the plan further and made some additional revisions. During both committee meetings, we had robust discussions with both the commissioners and residents about what additional things could be included in the plan or what things needed to be changed. So some things we added included a new section on bike share feasibility and what that could mean in Wilmette. More guidance on implementation, including an annual review of the plan by the transportation commissioners, and a more robust evaluation process that they could go through. We also revised the vision of the plan to make it more reflective of the goals of the community and more high level. And we also added some new education and encouragement initiatives and emphasized the need for further study for the Edens overpass underpass recommendation, which Jackie will talk about in a few slides. Next slide, please. So I'll turn it over to Jackie Henriksen now, who will talk a little bit more about their recommendations.
Great, thank you, Heather. So in addition to all of the great community feedback that Heather just spoke about, we also looked at data sets for the Wilmette roadway network. This included crash data. We looked at planned and existing bikeways regionally and from neighboring communities, and we looked at characteristics of the roadway, such as the roadway width, presence of sidewalks, and also traffic volumes, as well as other data sets. In addition to this, we looked at the previous bike plan, and we also considered other plans within Wilmette, including corridor studies, previous engineering studies conducted on the roadways, and plans from the neighboring municipalities, as well as regional plans. We looked at how these recommendations could tie into and work with existing village policies. And we also did on-bike field work. So we biked all over the community to get an idea of the on-the-ground conditions and see challenges and opportunities. So as we were considering the recommendations across the village, we factored in the impacts and the trade-offs of the recommendations. The goal here was to balance and minimize these trade-offs. At this stage, the recommendations in which the negative trade-offs outweighed the benefits, those recommendations did not move forward. And here is just a depiction of some of the many impacts and trade-offs that we considered. So here is a map of the recommended bike facilities that were included in the plan and the pedestrian facilities. The goal was to recommend designs that provided the highest level of pedestrian and bicycle safety and were context sensitive to the surrounding areas, while also balancing other trade-offs and impacts, such as parking and traffic. This network was also determined based on the community feedback in the first round of engagement. This included where residents currently walk and bike, as well as locations where they would desire walking and biking improvements. And then this network was revised based on the subsequent rounds of community engagement and public commenting periods. And there are more details on each of these recommendation types and the locations in the plan. So when considering design recommendations, we were thinking about creating and building upon a network of bike facilities that would connect to planned and existing regional trails, local and regional destinations, such as schools, business districts, and libraries, the neighboring communities' bike facilities, and existing routes that are already biked on. The goal was to create a network that not only met the needs of the recreational, avid, and confident cyclists, but also would provide comfortable and convenient facilities for all ages and abilities. So different bike facility designs provide varying levels of comfort based on the characteristics of the design, such as separation from traffic, as well as the characteristics of the roadway, such as traffic volume and speed. So this map here depicts the level of comfort of the recommended network. And then the graphic here shows the various facility types that were recommended in the plan and the level of comfort that they provide riders and the sort of streets they'd be recommended on. So as you go from left to right, the facility type is more robust and will in turn provide more comfort. On each corridor, we recommended the most comfortable facility where possible, while balancing the adjacent land use context and the trade-offs. So in addition to this, to implement some of these designs, traffic calming features would also have to be incorporated. For example, the bike boulevards is one of the most common recommendations in the plan. They provide routes through the community that connect bicyclists and pedestrians to key destinations and do not involve the removal of parking. So designs to slow car traffic and improve pedestrian and bicycle safety would also be incorporated into these designs. And in addition to that, these designs, the specifics of them would also be determined on a case-by-case basis, depending on the challenges of the roadway. So where we have listed in the plan multiple options, these are corridors that have a higher level of complexity and warrant further attention and individual feasibility studies prior to determining a preferred alternative. This would include a targeted round of community outreach. The idea here is that not every corridor is the same, and they all require different levels of effort. During the community engagement, difficulties crossing the Edens Expressway was a recurring theme, especially for children walking to school. This recommendation would require significantly more study, and at this point is very conceptual. The goal was to provide a connection for students across the Edens using local roads. And even with a side path, we heard that on Glenview, that many parents do not let their kids ride on it because it's busy. So providing a pedestrian underpass or overpass provides an alternative. And we also heard from the community that crossings at Lake and Glenview are not enough, as they're more than half a mile apart as a crow flies, which is farther since the streets don't connect through. So this provides a closer route for many students trying to get to Avoca and keeps them off busy roads. And last time we also heard a comment that the FHWA doesn't recommend pedestrian over or underpasses. And this is true at intersections where pedestrians are more likely to stay at grade. But this is not true when you're crossing a natural or a man-made barrier where there's no grade crossing. And as I mentioned before, this would involve additional engineering study and more targeted community engagement, which would be combined to determine a preferred location. And at this stage, it's still in very early planning concept designs. So the plan also provides a vision, which includes not just network improvements, but also initiatives that make the village a welcoming and comfortable place for walking and biking. The realization of this vision, just like the contents of the plan, will come from many different stakeholders, like the school district, park district, Walk Bike Wilmette, Go Green, the library, and through their special events and educational initiatives. And then finally, as part of the plan, we also include a chapter on implementation. So there are recommendations for the various facility types and to prioritize, and these were based on how they connect to the overall network, the interagency coordination that would be involved. For example, if a recommendation would be on a Wilmette controlled street, that could be easier to implement than if it's on a state or county street. We also weighed in safety factor. So would this would this recommendation have a big benefit to safety? We also looked at cost, planning level cost, and how the recommendations connect to destinations. And then there is also a section on the plan that details different funding programs. So the idea here is that that the plan would make the community a great candidate for many of these state and federal funding programs. So when the village is preparing applications, they can look to the plan and point towards it as support for the application. So as Heather mentioned before, the next step is we are looking to the committee to accept the plan and send to the village board for adoption. And we are also happy to take any comments or questions. And that is the end of our presentation.
Very impressive. I think compliments to you as well as we got some new village staff and mostly the residents and participation. I mean, this is a great comprehensive plan. A lot of work you can see has gone into this. And, you know, it's very hard to put, I'm sure, a bike plan in place in a nearly 150-year-old community that's pretty well developed. So some creative thinking and a lot to do. So I think this is a good first step. And as you both laid out, as well as Bridget, just getting to this point is a complementary step for the village to have finally a bike plan that we want to move forward with to the village board. So Bridget, before I turn over to trustees, how do you want anything, or is this time for myself, Trustee Kennedy, and Kurzman to ask questions?
Please feel free to deliberate.
So
ask questions.
Trustee Kennedy smiled at that, so maybe she's got the questions.
I do have a couple of questions. I thought this was supposed to be biking and pedestrian, but it seems, particularly going over it again for about the 9th time, it seems to be almost entirely bike, and it seems to make the assumption that bikers and pedestrians have the same interests and the same concerns, and I'm not sure that's true. Can you tell me how, when you were talking about pedestrians and pedestrian friendly, how you looked at that specifically, separately from how you look at biking?
Sure. So I think a lot of the pedestrian focused recommendations in the plan, they're focused on what we heard from a lot in the community in terms of crossing challenges, and those were located at major crossings or intersections where pedestrians have difficulties, and so a great portion of those recommendations focus on those areas in the intersection chapter. But I will say that also that most of the facilities, especially for bike boulevards, those designs would also include an element that would make it safer for pedestrians to use the roadway, as in addition to cyclists, because those designs would include traffic calming features.
Are you expecting pedestrians to walk in the street? I mean, because we do have sidewalks in almost all of the village, so pedestrians are going to be on the sidewalks, and I'm not exactly sure how traffic calming affects them directly or makes them safer.
Yeah, so the idea there would be that if cars are slowed down, if cars, and especially at key crossing locations where both bicyclists and pedestrians have to cross, that would benefit both of them.
The other question I had was, when you look at it from an intermodal perspective, which I think is the way that a lot of Wilmette residents who commute into the city, or did before they became fearful of using public transportation, and hopefully will get back to at some point, it seems to assume that everybody in the village goes to the Wilmette Metro Station or to the 4th and Linden, when in fact, the north central part of the village goes to the Kenilworth Station. And nothing in the plan seems to have considered that at all. And that, so my guess is, and I don't know if you did any studies on the number of people that use different train stations, that an awful lot of the village uses Kenilworth train station, and there is no consideration in the plan, I think, for pedestrians who use that train station? Is that something that just, I'm just curious why that is. There are also some, by the way, there are also some that use the Central Street train station in Evanston because proximity is more important than whether it's in your village.
Yeah, so Heather, feel free to chime in if I miss a point, but so much of the network was based on destinations that we saw within Wilmette, especially in terms of community engagement. So residents were encouraged on that interactive map to put down a dot where they thought was a destination that they wanted to be able to bike or walk to. And they could also indicate routes that they wanted improve for pedestrian bike safety. So much of our recommendations focused on those community-driven routes and destinations and trying to reach to those places.
Did you do any studies separate from just community input as to where people are actually going? Like where people, what train stations people actually use, where they walk, where they bike, whether they drive? Did you, and I'm sorry, I'm not being very articulate here. Besides just looking at what people told you, did you do any sort of objective research on who goes where in the village and whether they walk, bike, or drive?
We did not look at ridership data for the individual stations or bus stops. I believe we looked at Strava data for the bike network. So that's data looking at where people are biking and based on an app that a GPS app that they can use to track their rides. But that would be more focused on the recreational rides. So that wasn't one of the major factors because the plan was also looking at where residents would want to reach via commuting or errands. So we also looked at business districts and connecting to those within the village as well.
Okay. Another thing that kind of jumped out at me is that we've been, as you may know, we've gone through a stormwater management project here. And one of the options that was considered as part of the stormwater management project was building a conduit underneath the Edens Expressway. And so we have some engineering knowledge about the practicality of that. And I, Bridget, maybe you can, Dan can jump in. My assumption from everything that I heard and read about it when that was considered is that that was far too expensive and impractical. That would have been a more comprehensive way to solve our stormwater project, but it simply wasn't practical. Is there a difference between putting a stormwater sewer line underneath the Edens and a pedestrian tunnel in terms of feasibility?
Hi, Trustee Kennedy. I would say in general, the same issues and concerns we'd run into with the stormwater facility, we'd run into with trying to excavate a tunnel for pedestrian purposes. So there's no question there are engineering challenges with that option.
I mean, I wish this plan was, it's wonderful in many ways. But I do think that it's somewhat impractical in that we had knowledge about some of these options and we know that they don't work or that they are so cost prohibitive that they're impractical. And it seems to me that we should take the village's knowledge about all these things in unrelated projects and share it with the bike people so that we're all on the same page about this and not continue to have a plan that shows an underpass on the Edens that we as a village have already concluded is impractical and prohibitively expensive. Sorry to be a downer, but I think, I think that when we get to the point where we're presenting something to the village board, I don't particularly want to see things on there that look like potential promises when personally, I would have voted for the stormwater project that put the sewer tunnel underneath there. But I became convinced it wasn't feasible. And the idea that we would spend that kind of money for a bike tunnel when we wouldn't spend it for a larger project kind of troubles me a little bit.
So Trustee Kennedy, you've made some really nice points, and I always learn something from you, to be sure. I guess I don't view, even though your points make total sense to me, I don't view those necessarily as sort of shortcomings of the plan. I think it is the value that the Municipal Services Committee can bring to the process, and I think you're bringing a lot of value. Just the way that I read what the intention is for the plan and what it's supposed to do. I wouldn't want it to lack imagination or vision, and so I have more comfort level with having the whole array of potential options, even if some are less feasible, because I think that's what kind of is needed. I think it was touched on just briefly by Ms. Berger early on in talking about how challenging the parameters are for doing this. In the case of West Wilmette, my take on it is we're really retrofitting the entire west side, which was designed exclusively with cars in mind, and trying to make it, more bike and pedestrian and friendly, and that's not a small task. And so some ideas are huge, and some ideas are really nuts and bolts. Why didn't we do that last week? Type of thing. So I really do appreciate your points of view. I just my personal take is that it's not a shortcoming of the plan. It's what you and I and Trustee and Chair Sullivan can bring to the plan.
I understand what you're saying, and I'm not trying to cut off people's dreams, but I also don't want to create false impressions that there are options on the table if they're not really on the table. I think that when we start talking about adopting a plan with aspirations, they should be aspirations that both fit our needs and also that are practical. And I think there's just a few elements, the underpass being one of them, that just strike me as something we have already as a village decided is off the table. And so to see it still in the plan at this late date, I find a little, I'm concerned about creating false expectations for people, because it's not going to happen. And I don't think that we should continue to hold that out to make a part of the community feel like they're being listened to if we're not going to do it. And I just think that we should put plans forward that are actually doable. And an awful lot of this plan is doable. So it's not as if I would throw out the baby with the bathwater, but I think that it needs to be tailored to what we can actually accomplish.
I think that's well said. I have two ideas to throw out and see how you might react, and Chair Sullivan might react. One is, asking you, are you proposing that to get pulled all together? And then secondarily, what would you think about having it listed as with other things that are sort of coined as multiple options? That applied to a number of other instances where there's just more to come on it. And so that would maybe take the edge off of it to some degree. And I say this, and I would like to be tangible with this so that we could kind of move on. It would be a shame if we spent exclusively all this time on that one topic when there are lots of other good stuff and other things needing constructive criticism too. So I'm just wondering, what's your proposal for any sort of fix it so that you're comfortable to move forward?
I'm not gonna vote against it just because there are elements that I think are pie in the sky. And I'm not going to vote against it because it's not as comprehensive on other issues as I wish it was. So I am disappointed that it doesn't spend more time worrying about pedestrian concerns, because I think that I've lived in the village for 33 years, and I can tell you that commuters to the train stations have complained about certain aspects and they walk, and that's to be encouraged, and that's to be made safe. And there are certain things that have come up, and as long as I've lived in the village for 33 years that have not been addressed, and they don't even make it into the plan. And I'm a little bit, I feel like it under delivers in some respects and then over promises in other respects. We can just decide it's just a conceptual document, but I'm just expressing my concern that it isn't really there yet. It isn't really consistent with both what we need and what we can do. So dreaming is great, but I would like the dreams to be within at least the parameters of what is possible, and also what we need to think about. And the biking community is very vocal in Wilmette, and that's a good thing, and I encourage that. But the pedestrian population has to be listened to too. Many of them are older people. Many of them cannot bike or wouldn't feel safe biking. I can tell you, if you've lost your driver's license, you're not a safe biker. So it's not, making it easier for biking is great for a lot of people, but it's not for everyone. And walking is just about for everyone. And it also doesn't take into account people who are less abled.
Yes.
So I don't see anything in there that would suggest making it easier for older people, for example, to cross the railroad crossings, which are steep graded and very dangerous in the wintertime. I don't see a whole lot about making it safer for people who walk very slowly to cross roads like Sheridan Road or Ridge Road or Green Bay Road.
Yeah.
So in a lot of aspects, I think it's responsive to a community that is vocal, but not necessarily responsive to a community that just has been suffering for 33 years and unheard, just unheard.
So that is, I mean, that's great perspective. I mean, the way I've approached it, like in my time on the board, has been through the CIP. And there have been a number of things that we've knocked out that have been, I think, favorable. Every time we seem to do a major intersection, the crossings are always made better. They're either the corners are pinched or whatnot. So I think these things happen without fanfare, sort of on a more regular basis. But I'm fundamentally not just a little bit in agreement with you. I'm a lot in agreement with you. And in fact, further on in the agenda, we see, what it takes to create new sidewalks. The hurdle is so high. And what I'm going to be proposing when we get there, so we might as well go there now, is, that we need to revisit that policy, that the burden needs to be the opposite. That, for all the reasons that go into the premise of the bike plan, about public health, about, accessibility for people of all abilities, like we make creating sidewalks where there are none so difficult.
Yeah. And,
this committee can address stuff like that. But so I guess that's just another point to further your points, of which I'm in agreement that, there is more to do on the pedestrian front. And so, I'm with you. And so, but again, I guess, and I don't want to step on Chairman Sullivan's, handling of this. My previous question to you was just like, well, what are you proposing? Because let's, if there are problems, let's fix it, let's do what we got to do.
Yeah, there is no, for example, inventory of what streets don't have sidewalks. And the west side of the village has a number of streets with no sidewalks on either side. And there are other sections where the sidewalk is interrupted. There's one on the agenda tonight where the sidewalk goes halfway down the block and then just stops. That's not that uncommon in the newer part of the village. And that's a problem. And that I don't see any reference at all to that sort of issue in this plan. So if you're, and it seems to me that stuff is fairly easy to fix. Well, not super easy. It could be easier than it is. We have a complicated process that makes it more difficult than it should be. But that, we need to think about pedestrians too. And we do have real problems in the village, particularly with the fact that our population is largely older or older than the metropolitan average. And they need to be considered as well. They're less likely to speak out, I think. But their concerns are real.
So it would seem that that feedback did not get into this process, is what you're saying. It's there, but it didn't work its way in. Because I like the process that this plan has had,
I do too.
but
It's harder to reach certain aspects, certain segments of the population. That's just a reality, and that you can't rely on just putting up posters and telling people to talk about it. And in my experience, because I am older and I know a lot of older people, they thought this was a bike plan. They saw it as a bike plan. They saw all of the materials and thought it was about biking, and they didn't think to talk about pedestrian issues. It didn't even have the word pedestrian in it until fairly recently, where they added the word walker. Before that, it was just a bike plan. And so if you didn't get data and feedback from the community about walkers, it's because you didn't really portray it in a way that would have made them think that it related to walkers, particularly older walkers and the less abled. I just think, Frank,
You both are having a good discussion here and raising some good points. I just want to make sure, go back to a couple of things to resolve, but mainly, Bridget, given what the purpose of this is, and really just sort of the initial plan to the village board, to take into what Trustee Kennedy is referring to as far as, we talked a lot about bikes, and I can see it, but when it comes to some of the pedestrian enhancements, should we add that in here, or is that something that once it goes to the design phase that you take that into consideration as well in feasibility? Because I go back to phase 2 or page 2, of what this is, but it really is, and I'm focused on that word conceptual. Once it gets into, hey, we're going to do this, is that when the village board and engineering take all of the pedestrian, bike lanes, cars, all of that into?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Sullivan. That's exactly right. Perfect example, Locust Road. We took that opportunity to improve just about every crossing along that corridor. Same with Central Avenue. So anytime we have a capital project, we look at every intersection and where we can add curb extensions and crosswalks, high visibility crosswalks, a pedestrian push button to make sure a elderly person has enough time to cross the street. Those are all elements that we naturally look at when we perform any type of engineering study on a roadway. So some may be a little bit more isolated. I know in the CIP for next year, we're proposing the pedestrian push button, the rapid reflecting beacons on Sheridan Road at Plaza del Lago. So that will be a huge improvement to help the population on the east side cross Sheridan Road, which is obviously a high volume, higher speed roadway. Same with Ridge Road. I think there's some opportunities to enhance those crossings. So while they may not be specifically spelled out in the plan, they're definitely on our radar. And as we go through the prioritization process, we will include those. And I think the purpose of the plan is more general. It talks about intersection typologies, and it gives us tools in our toolbox. So when we go through this engineering evaluation of a roadway, we know what type of treatments would be appropriate, and just gives us more information to work with when we actually develop a plan.
Kennedy, you raised good points, and I think you both are in opposite corners, so I feel like I'm looking in the opposite corner. So Trustee Kurzman, you got the process of the SIP process and mentioned that, but I think going back to Trustee Kennedy, and I don't want to put words totally in your mouth, but I mean, how do we give assurances that this plan we put forth doesn't feel like we're eliminating the transportation aspect, that when we come forward with whatever segment that we're going to move forward with, that is addressed? Does that make sense what I'm asking? How you get with that piece?
I think I know what you're asking, but oh, by the way, just so you know, what I see on my screen is going to be different from you.
Right.
Everybody,
you're looking at Trustee Kurzman. That's fine. I'm not insulted.
So I'm right underneath with Joel, but I don't know why. I don't know how it works. It's magic. I don't know. I think what we ought to call this is what it is, which is a bike plan, because it just isn't comprehensive enough. and we have our own sort of process, although I don't necessarily think it's going as, I think that we do a good job when something is called to the attention, but I think that some things like Ridge Road and Sheridan Road have been ignored for decades. But I think that the sidewalk, the crossings, all that stuff, we are doing a fairly good job of handling that on our own without a plan. But what we're looking at tonight is a bike plan, and that's fine. But let's call it that, and not pretend like it really has any meaningful recommendations for pedestrians, because it doesn't hit most of the issues. It doesn't hit where people actually walk. They actually walk to the Kennel Road train station from a lot. They walk to the Central Street train station. They don't just walk within Wilmette. We don't have a fence around our borders. People go all over the place. And the reliance on the community to come to the planners, instead of the planners having a sort of independent objective study of how people use bikes and walk, makes it somewhat limited. And it's aspirational, it's impressive. I like the bike plan part of it. I just don't think that it goes farther than that. And I don't want to oversell it, and I don't want it to be seen as a complete comprehensive plan for how we're going to treat pedestrians and bicyclists, when it really just treats bicyclists.
Trustees or Chairman Solomon, if I may add one other item, Trustee Kennedy, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Wilmette. We adopted a complete streets policy as well a few years ago.
Yes.
And the purpose of that policy is to it's a multimodal look at all users of the roadway when we go through engineering design. So it's another layer of guidance that staff uses when we go through these road evaluations.
Right. So we sort of have our own process on the pedestrian thing, and this hasn't added anything to it. So I think we ought to be honest when we are selling this and say, what is this plan? And it's a bike plan. It is not an active transportation plan. It does not really, and it doesn't mesh with our own processes in terms of looking at intersections and sidewalks and crossings. So I just would like to label it correctly and recognize its limitations. And I just don't want to create expectations that will not be met.
I do think some students walking to school will be enhanced by this directly, and not just bike, but that's not the entire population. So your points still hold. I don't offer that in disagreement. I just think that when I think a number of these things, I mean, my goodness, in West Wilmette, some kids get driven to school when they live just a few blocks away from school.
That's all over the village.
And I do think some of these things will improve the walkability of West Wilmette, but none of that is to disagree with your points. I've learned a lot from you, and your comments are very compelling.
No, it raised a fair point. I think I align with Trustee Kurzman. I understand it, and it does. We talk a lot about the biking and focused in those are maps, and but I still go back. I think where I get comfortable in it, because I was going to circle back on the tunnel versus bridge, which I think we can over the Edens, and totally agree. We have knowledge that if we need to go out there and put a tunnel under the Edens and Plaza, it's way too expensive. We're not going to do it. I sort of liked how the team laid it out to say this is an option. I mean, first of all, I'm not a big fan of tunnels. Aside from the expense, I'm not sure that would be the smartest thing for us to do. But I think showing it out there, again, sticking with what this is conceptual, just to show show our residents, is okay to do. And I don't think it would read like this is a promise. I also don't know if Bridget and we think a tunnel is the best thing, and for some reason the Edens goes through a major rehaul and development, and Bridget comes to us and the team says it's cheap to put a tunnel in because they've ripped up the whole road. We might do it. Now that's a low probability, but you never know. So I think for me, I was okay with it as conceptual to have it in there, and not feel like this is promises. And I'm a little bit more comfortable though I think this is a valid point, and somehow maybe Bridget, we can figure out how to put Trustee Kennedy's concerns on the pedestrian side and inside this plan somewhat, but saying this is just ideas that we're going to work through this. As we go through and develop this is a start. These are all conceptuals, not definitive plans, as we know. And again, we reference stormwater a lot. I think, Joel, you saw a lot of conceptual stormwater solutions over your years. It took us a long time to get to the final solution. So.
Yeah, no, that's all very true. And
so,
I don't know where the tunnel really came from, to be honest. I was always sort of thinking a fly personally, but so I was kind of surprised by it. But again, like for me, like that all just presumed you couldn't make the Lake Street overpass work, and that one won't be cheap either. But if there's a way to make the Lake Street overpass work for people of all abilities, then neither of those things may have to be totally necessary. So some of it's on me that I didn't have the faith that we could address the Lake Street overpass, and that's certainly been in the works since the pedestrian facilities report of 2015. That one's been a nut too big to crack. We got, it was a much easier proposition on Glenview Road, and I really liked the outcome there. But the Lake Street overpass, that thing is, I hope if nothing else, we can all agree that that is not acceptable. And I hope it's also clear, just as much as we get into the nuts and bolts of the plan, that getting our kids to school has to be a priority. So if you're against the tunnel, as I know some residents are, I hope you're for something else, because those kids have a really difficult time getting to school, and that causes all sorts of stuff. When people are driving their kids to school like 3 or 4 blocks, that gets in the way of the Loyola commutes and the New Trier commutes and all that stuff. So we got to figure it out, and so I hope, if nothing else, we just have the shared priority that we got to get kids to school safely. And we need to have full imagination how to do that, and so in my mind, if we can get the Lake Street overpass to fill the void, that takes a lot off the need for a tunnel or a flyover. But that's easy for me to say, but that's sort of how I've been viewing it, sort of over a medium term.
So. Trustee Kurzman, Trustee Kennedy, any questions for Heather, Jackie, Bridget, anybody before we open up the comments? I mean, we'll come back to them, but I just want to make sure we probe further before we open it up. Joel, anything from your end?
No, I mean, I think I said my piece mostly.
And we're going to come back, by the way, at the end. I just we wanted to open up to any residents that wanted to talk. So sorry.
Yeah, I maybe I'll just throw one last thing out, and it's a little bit more in the complaint category a little bit, and that is, like, to me, the ideal would be comfort level end to end in the village, and the fact that we can't seem to make a high comfort level end to end in our village, it's a bummer, but there are reasons for it. It speaks to the challenges. We're rectangular, first of all, and we've got brick streets and all that. But like when I look at the different maps and I don't see, total matching up of comfort level from one end to the other, that's a shortcoming. I don't know if there's more we can do to make that happen, to squeeze the turnip to make it happen, but it would be really nice if we had that connectivity where somebody could really go end to end in the village, people of all abilities. So I just want to throw that out there. If Ridge Road seems to be a bugaboo, and Elmwood, but that is just a concern that I had looking at the plan. And with that, I'll give it back to you, Trustee Sullivan.
Say, any comments, or Bridget, should we open it up to
Sure.
So, so at this time, we'll open it up for public comment. I read through the instructions of how we did that and I put them away. So I think just as a reminder, if you want to make a comment, you can either email them to publiccomment@wilmette.com and somebody on the team will read that. Or I think on Teams, you can either raise your hand or announce if you want to public comment. And then if you've dialed in, you can just say *6 and you want to speak. And depending on who wants to speak, we'll try and keep an order and go from there. So why don't I start, I don't know, Bridget or Dan, whoever's, do we have any emailed comments from public comment at wilmette.com?
Danielle Horn from our office is keeping an eye on comments. Danielle, did anything come in?
We have a lot of Dan people on this call.
Yes, we do. None have come in through the YouTube live channel. That's the one that I'm monitoring. All comments that were received through public comment email before the meeting were provided earlier.
And posted on our website as well.
Correct.
So if we got them before the meeting, we don't need to have somebody read them at this meeting. Those are considered received and read.
Correct.
Okay. And so nothing else since the meeting started. All right, so then is there anybody on Teams or on the phone that wish to speak or be heard on this plan?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment if I can.
Okay, and just give me your name, please. Sorry.
Damon Doucette. I'm a resident of the village, been here more than 20 years. We live over on Lawler on the west side. I liked what Trustee Kennedy said about the tunnel, because that's one thing that we've had great concerns about. Trustee Kurzman said he hoped that people who oppose the tunnel would at least like other aspects or support something. We think a flyover, if necessary, is something that we could support, simply because it removes all the concerns we've got about what we've expressed before, about crime, about litter, about teenagers gathering, about isolation. How is it going to be policed? But I also agree with what he said towards the end of his comments. If we can make Lake and Glenview work, I think that's probably the most cost-effective and appropriate way to deal with this. And then one other thing, and Trustee Kennedy alluded to this. We've heard from bikers. As she said, probably haven't heard from pedestrians. We really haven't heard from residents. There are more than 27,000 people in this village. And by my count, based on the presentation earlier, 5,000 people have provided some form of input. Those of us on the west side, and we've talked to everybody on this street, we actually gone door to door. Nobody knew about this until August. The first time we all appeared and made comments or emailed comments. So the residents of this village pay for this, and they need to have a say. And I love what Trustee Kennedy said about the fact that we're an older village. We have a lot of people who are physically challenged, and we need to make sure that everybody's input as much as possible. Obviously, not a perfect world, but that everybody in the village has a chance to chime in on this. We support bike paths. We support more pedestrian traffic. It's good for the environment. It's good for the village. But it's got to be done in the light of day so that nobody can say we didn't know. Whether they agree with it or not, they at least have a chance to talk. So with that being said, I do appreciate your time, and thank you for your attention.
Before we respond on those, any other participants wish to add public comment to this? Okay. It's like somebody's trying to get in the lobby here. There we go. Well, I don't think any other comment. So, Trustee Kurzman, I think you're trying to speak, but you're on mute.
I just observe a gentleman who might be trying to call in a comment.
Okay. So I think that person just came in through the lobby. The number was sort of blacked out. So if you just joined, we're still talking about the bike and active transportation plan, and we open it up to public comment. We'll sort of, if anybody wants to make a comment and you're online, either raise your hand or speak up, or if you're on a phone, I think it's at *6, so you unmute yourself, and we'll wait to be heard. I'll just give it another 30 seconds. We're not going anywhere, so.
Is it possible to make a comment?
Yes, sir. Yep.
You have my letter ready. I'm Alan Dordek. I'm a resident of the 600 block on Lawler. As resident, we formed a committee called Launch, Lawler and Wilmette No Underpass Concerned Households. We're residents of both streets who are generally concerned about the potential of planned bicycle paths on Lawler and Wilmette Avenues, and more importantly, the underpass/overpass, or whatever you want to call it, currently planned for the intersection of Wilmette and Lawler. I personally can bring relevant experience to this opinion as a retired business executive, a 3-term and current member of the District 37 Avoca School Caucus, and most importantly, the precinct captain of New Church Township Wilmette Precinct number 24. I could define the precinct, but it's basically Lake, Hibbard, Wilmette Avenue, and Laramie. The overpass, underpass, and Washington, Wilmette, and Lawler Avenue sections of the proposed bicycle paths are in this precinct. While my wife and I and other precinct residents, including Damon, who just spoke, recently passed out door hangers concerning how to vote by mail to virtually every household in the precinct, we had discussions about the bike paths and the potential of underpass, overpass with residents we met who expressed similar concerns with the idea. There has been more than one arrest at the corner of Wilmette Avenue and Lawler concerning drug and other crimes, and putting a 24-hour open passageway would only increase the potential for similar activities. In addition, a teenager was brutally murdered on Briar Drive, merely 2 blocks away, in a botched drug deal. Again, a 24-hour underpass, overpass would only increase the potential for similar activities. In my role as a caucus member, interviewing school board candidates and conversing with other residents of the district, the topic of bicycling to Avoca West Primary School never arose. A potential reason given for the underpass overpass and avoiding existing thoroughfares like Lake Avenue and Glenview Road was for the children riding their bikes to Avoca West. However, Wilmette Avenue ends at Laramie, and any bike rider would have to go to Lake and Glenview Road to go west and get to the school. So that argument is not logical. Mr. Sullivan, would you like an underpass, overpass on your block of Greenwood? Ms. Kennedy, would you want an overpass, underpass on your block of Beechwood? Mr. Kurzman, would you want an overpass, underpass on your block of Greenleaf? Ms. Hendrickson, would you want your child 10 years of age or younger riding a bike under an expressway to school? I believe the answer to all questions are no. We all understand that people will ride bikes on our streets. And when I was younger, I spent many evenings visiting with neighbors with my young son in tow on my bike. We don't want to stop bike riders, but we don't want streets designed as bike paths. And certainly we don't want an underpass, overpass on our street. You wouldn't want it, and we don't want it. I've worked successfully with Bridget on other initiatives, and I know how the system can work, and I believe the system can work well again on this initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we address this, any other comments? Still wait.
I'm still getting my head around the comment speaking to somebody's child. I'm not sure what I understood what that was about, or whether I found that appropriate, but maybe I heard it differently than other people, but I question the appropriateness of that.
I think taking a step back. So let me, with the overpass, the tunnel and the overpass, and I know, you know, it sounds in this plan, there's again, there's a few concepts out there. Let me, we're going to put an overpass or some crossover of the Edens Expressway, which, you know, is needed in some areas. I mean, is this sort of, does this plan set us in stone, or is there still just flexibility of where we can place that? And Bridget, I'm sort of addressing that to you. I mean, that's, if I understand what we're doing tonight, this is just how do we solve crossing or getting from one side to the other of the Edens Expressway, which is needed, but in an appropriate
Sure.
location.
Yeah, the purpose of this plan is to identify the barrier to walking or biking. And this particular crossing at Wilmette Avenue was identified as a real opportunity to lessen the distance for school kids to get to Avoca and Wilmette Junior High and Ramona School. So that's why the connection is shown in the plan. How that connection is built, whether it be an overpass, underpass, and what that looks like, that's not the purpose of this plan. That's the purpose of the next step, which is to go through a engineering feasibility study. And let me just say, if we were to do, when we do a feasibility study for this, the tunnel may drop off very quickly as an option. Similar to, you know, the, I think it was the neighborhood storage option A, you know, the $77 million plan, kind of, we discussed it, but eventually determined it wasn't appropriate. Same with this. It wouldn't take a lot of study to reach the conclusion that perhaps it wasn't the best choice for this connection. So that would be the next level of study.
You know, it's a feasibility study, but then when and do you address some of the safety concerns and issues that were floated tonight? Oh, is that it?
With the tunnel at the same time?
Tunnel or even the flyover or bridge, whatever we call it.
That's a good question. That's all part of the same discussion, Trustee Sullivan.
I mean, those are legitimate concerns on you know, the safety of our residents and guests in the village. So. Right. So I guess I'm going to turn it back to the trustees as far as, and maybe Bridget, you can help answer this as well, but sort of next steps. Do we want to move this forward to the village board? Do we want to bring it back? Do we want addendums? How are folks feeling? And I would put that out there. I mean, I do, Trustee Kennedy raised some concerns of things that are missing or that are important, especially when it comes to the pedestrian usage and transportation. I think somehow we should address that or make note of that, but I'd like to somehow try and at least move this forward to the village board to at least get this in process, to get this so we can continue moving forward with it. But I'm open to other suggestions or how the other two trustees are feeling. So,
Well, I'm pissed off. I feel like that last comment, to reference somebody's child is not okay, and I'm not going to stand by for that. That was weak. We can't have that. That's not civil. I need to call that out. That's not okay. All right, now back to regularly scheduled programming. Trustee Sullivan, I agree with you that this is a process that we need to keep it going. I really don't see, and I feared this coming into the meeting that that this one issue, could be a hang up to the process, and that misses the fact that this is a process. So I'm with you, if I understood you correctly, that you want to proceed. The plan, I think it'll be reflected in the minutes, different feedback people have had. But if people on this line think that because of their opposition to a tunnel, which will likely never happen, that we should hold up the plan, I'm not with that.
No, I wouldn't be in favor of that either. I want to make it clear that when we present this to the board, that we are presenting it at a very, very high conceptual level, because I don't want to make it sound like a promise. And my experience, as a short experience as a trustee, is that often when we adopt plans, people see them as promises. And I want to make sure that that is not the case. And I also, on the pedestrian side, I want to make sure that we're not presenting it as really much of a recommendation when it comes to pedestrian safety, but that it be considered mostly a bike plan, because honestly, that's what it was presented to at the early stages, and that's pretty much what it still is. So I want our recommendation to reflect what it really covers, and I think that's biking. And I wanted also to make sure that people understand that this is, we are not committing to anything in here, because some of these recommendations are probably beyond our ability to do. And I don't want someone to view this as a commitment to do this, because I know from short experience that when you adopt something, people go, okay, you promised this. And I don't want that to happen here. So that's just what it's a question of framing it. It's a question of presenting how we present it to the board, not necessarily go back to the drawing board and start all over again. In fact, I don't recommend that at all. But I think we should be honest about how we frame it and how we present it to the board, and what we say to the community about what this plan does and does not do. Does that make sense? I'm not sure I'm making sense.
It makes perfect sense, because I think it addresses. I mean, I think you very clearly pointed out some of the gaps that are in this, and so I'm looking at Bridget, sort of thinking how do we want to address that, because it is appropriate to address. I don't think I think your point this wasn't to have every detail, but Trustee Kennedy did raise some concerns that we need to at least get it in there so everybody knows that this is going to continue to evolve.
Sure. So Trustee Kennedy, I struggle a little bit with the strength of your statement that this doesn't address pedestrian issues. Just going through the table of contents, the vision statement, there's pages dedicated to barriers for walkers. It does identify gaps in sidewalks and intersections that pedestrians found difficult to cross. It talks about intersection typologies and gives us tools to address those. So I would not suggest or recommend that the title or the purpose of the plan be changed to a bike plan, because I do believe it is more holistic than just a bike plan. And while it may not meet your expectations as an active transportation plan, it does offer many elements that go beyond just biking in Wilmette. And that's what we heard from in the community too. I think there's an expectation from the community, the people who did talk to us about barriers and walking. We've included those elements, and I'd hate to have them struck or misidentified in the plan.
No, I wouldn't strike them, Bridget. I understand what you're saying, and there are some recommendations, but because it doesn't really take into account how, there's no there are discussions of where people bike, but there's no discussion in where people walk. And we have walking plans for the various schools, and those aren't included on the map. We know how people get to and from the various mass transit stations, but those aren't included on the map. And without knowing where people are walking, just like without knowing where people are biking and where they want to go, you're not really presenting much of a plan. You're talking about concepts of how to solve problems, but not where the problems are.
And I think that's true. I think that's really a function of the fact that our sidewalk network is very much built out with few exceptions. So our goal in the next agenda item is going to talk about the sidewalk policy and how we might go about filling those gaps. Whereas the bike network was severely lacking in connections and routes. So there was a lot more room to grow with the bike plan. I think with the walking segment of the plan, however, like I said, the infrastructure is there. It's just a matter of improving it as we find priorities and continue to work away at it.
So, Trustee Kennedy, anything, or let's go back to sort of next steps and what we want to move forward to the board. How do this presentation? Is there a way that we can at least address that, or whether it's an additional? I don't want to minimize it, but at least a slide to talk about sort of one other fact. The transportation, bring something in, so at least it's in there. I think that's a fair point to ask.
Absolutely.
So, work on that.
Yep, absolutely.
And then maybe before we get to the board, Trustee Kennedy, get it to to this group offline. We can just review it with the three of us before we go, so we're all aware. that works.
You bet.
And I think it's a fair discussion too, even at the board, Trustee Kennedy. So, because again, you did raise some good points and concerns, and I think that we heard from one resident who said they appreciated, that representation. So, okay. And then Trustee Kurzman, I do want to go back. I think, that comment, and I agree, and I appreciate you expressing that disappointment. I think it was totally appropriate, and I apologize that I was caught off my game because I was sort of off record when they threw out my address or my street and your streets. I thought that was a little odd and creepy and inappropriate to begin with. So I was, my head wandered for a half a second. So, but I appreciate you raising that. And it was disappointing because I don't want that to reflect. I think actually this was a terrific conversation. I think you both raised some good concerns on this. I think you advocated for this for our residents and good resident participation. And this is a good first step. So I don't want to diminish all the work that has been done. We know a lot more is going to come up and very good, which we always do in this village, very collaborative. We get to collaborative solutions. You might not like it initially on paper, but then we get there and it seems to somehow Bridget and her team masterfully pull it off and everybody's happy. So
I don't disagree with that.
Right. So thank you, Trustee Kurzman, for bringing that up. So Bridget, do you need us to take a vote on moving this forward?
Yes,
Or
please.
do we have a motion to move this to the village board?
I so move.
Okay, Trustee Kurzman.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Perfect. So good. So congratulations. Well done. Hopefully you all heard some of the comments. I know there's going to be a lot more feedback, but we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I got to get back to my agenda, so apologize. So now we're on item number 4, which is a petition to review for filing finding my glasses. Petition review for filling sidewalk gap on the 500 block of Hibbard Road. So Bridget, am I turning this over to you or?
Sure, I'll briefly address the committee on this item. The village board has adopted a sidewalk policy that lays out a procedure to request gaps or new sidewalk on streets that do not currently have them. The petitioner in this case was a resident who requested filling a sidewalk gap between 521 and 527 Hibbard Road, where there is a gap in the sidewalk. They met all the requirements of the policy, including a petition approved by 67% of the stakeholders that are impacted. Our staff then did an engineering feasibility study, reviewed the site conditions, talked to the neighbors involved regarding tree removals that were necessary in order to build the sidewalk gap, and performed just a preliminary high-level design to determine a cost estimate to fill that gap. So according to the policy, the next step is to take this recommendation to fill the sidewalk gap to the village board, the committee, Municipal Services Committee, and at your approval, we will add the sidewalk gap into the CIP for consideration later this year, actually through the budget process. So that is the purpose of this agenda item.
Any initial questions from any of the trustees?
Yeah.
Do we want to hear from the neighbors, or should we hear from the neighbors?
Mr. or Mrs. Stein?
Hello.
Good
Can
evening.
you hear us?
We can hear you.
I guess you can. Hi, Eric and Kathy Stein. We're 521 Hibbard Road. And thank you, trustees and staff, for the time and the opportunity to present our petition. As Bridget said, the sidewalk ends at our driveway. There's a gap. And our main concern is pedestrian safety here. When people are on that sidewalk and they hit our driveway, they have a couple of choices. One is to cross Hibbard in the middle of the block. Another one is to walk over the yard or the parkway. And the third, which is the worst, is to walk along Hibbard Road. over to Greenleaf. And that's really, the main issue there. You see people doing that, people in strollers, with strollers and so forth with dogs. It's not good. So that's
strollers with babies, not strollers with dogs.
Yes. So that's the main issue. The other issue or advantage is connecting the neighborhood between Central and Greenleaf. The sidewalk goes all the way around on the west side, but then we can't quite make the circle because of the gap. And it would help our block and kids, riding their bikes and even smaller kids, to be able to make that connection. So those are our main concerns, and that's why we made this request.
I would like to chime in. We live very close to the Skokie Boulevard, Hibbard Road, the area that was recently converted into that's pedestrian friendly now. And I cannot tell you what a huge change it has made. I mean, unfortunately, our kids we now have a freshman in college and we have a sophomore at New Trier. But our younger son was in 8th grade and he could finally ride his bike or walk to Marie Murphy without worrying about being run over, on Skokie Boulevard. So I did want to take the opportunity to thank you for that much needed improvement. And we really just want to continue making our neighborhood safe for our community. Our side of Hibbard is Avoca, and the other side of Hibbard is the District 39, Ramona. Really doesn't make a whole lot of difference, but it's nice that the rest of the Avoca community behind us, if we had this, we can create like the bike circle, because, my children have spent all their lives, if they want to go to the rec center, they have to cross the street at our driveway. It's a fairly busy street, in order to ride south over there. And actually have seen bikers just right over our lawn at this point right now. So that's not helping anyone. We have brand new neighbors at 527 who could not be, but we've been talking about it. And they have a 4-year-old daughter and they cannot wait for the sidewalk. We just, the community, and just cannot wait to have that whole circle bike riding. And I just really think it would help the community here just connect that much better. I'm hoping for more trick-or-treaters and, fun things like that. We kind of feel a little bit outside of the neighborhood, but we hope that this really helps the community feel as well. So thank you for the opportunity just to present this to you.
Very well said. And I think we're all hoping for a lot of trick-or-treaters this year. But were there anybody else that wished to speak on this request? So I'm hopeful that maybe the other trustees felt the same. I read this, and admittedly, this was an easy one for me to be in agreement with and spend a whole lot of time thinking about it. I know, we're watching, I addressed it with Bridget, and I know we're watching money as we always do, and I have concerns on the trees, but this is, for me, I could easily support this. So I'll open it up. Uh-oh, Trustee Kurzman's smiling at me.
Yeah, well, I'm with you. So I spent just a little bit of time on site, and I did watch a baby stroller have to, a family with a young stroller have to cross Hibbard in the middle of the street. So these aren't hypotheticals. It's very real, and this is a great, easy thing for us to do to further all the things we discussed previously.
Kennedy?
Oh, I'm so impressed that the Steins took it upon themselves to push this, because a lot of people would say, you can't take my yard away from me. And this is truly in the public's interest, and I think they're being selfless, and I think it's wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. and Mrs. Stein.
So Bridget, when will this look to get constructed? Next year?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna recommend it in the 2021 budget, so it would be a next year construction.
So the three of us are just are agreeing with you on this, assuming we both, this doesn't go to the village, this will just be in our budget process when we meet in a couple weeks.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. Okay. Do you need us to make a recommendation, or do you feel like the three of us are aligned?
I do. I'm getting a strong vibe here. I like it.
She doesn't have to be a tea reader, I don't think.
We had to put on our best show tonight because I know some other people want to watch some other debates and everything.
Yeah.
So it's more entertaining.
Watch a rerun of Friends.
Accomplishing a lot more. Anyways, so perfect. Do you need anything else? Otherwise, Mr. and Mrs. Stein, hopefully you heard good news. So, but and I agree with Trustee Kennedy. Great for you to join us tonight and support it, and all the comments on the community. So it's nice.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great. Moving on to our next agenda item, which is number 5, the annual review of the village's MS4 NPDES permit.
Sure.
So.
We saved the best for last.
I'm turning that one right to you.
So some of you may or may not know, the village operates a municipal sewer system. On the west side, it's a separate system. On the east side, it's a combined system. This particular permit issued by the IEPA, called NPDES, is basically for the separate sewer system west of Ridge Road. And each year, the village has to submit a report to the IEPA that lays out how we're meeting all the goals and intentions of the permit. There are 6 minimum control measures that we have to address, and they include public education and outreach, public involvement and participation, illicit discharge detection and elimination, construction site stormwater runoff control, post-construction stormwater management in new development and redevelopment, and pollution prevention / good housekeeping for municipal operations. So I certainly won't go through our entire program, but there's dozens and dozens of bullet points that are summarized in our stormwater management program that we include in our review with the IEPA each year, just to show them that making sure we are respectful of our stormwater is inclusive in everything we do at Public Works and in the village. So it covers all of our engineering projects, all of our permitting, all of our operations from Public Works. So every facet of what we do takes in mind how we're impacting the stormwater that goes into our sewer system. And I can say we have a really good track record with the EPA. At one point, I thought they were using our plan to show other municipalities on what a good plan looks like. So we're really proud of it. The reason why we're bringing it to the committee right now is because there is a requirement that it be reviewed annually at a public meeting. We've been talking about stormwater so much the last 5 years. We've discussed many aspects of this, but moving forward annually, we will add this to Municipal Services Committee agenda just so that everybody has an opportunity to take a look at our good work. And there's no action requested on this.
Thank you, Bridget. It was fascinating reading.
Thank you.
You're muted, Dan.
So in the layperson, what questions should we be asking you, Bridget? I mean, before I turn to Trustee Kurzman, who I know knows more about stormwater than, but really, what were?
You know, honestly, there's one thing that comes to mind, Trustee Sullivan, and that is the brine machine.
Oh.
Right there.
Perfect.
Right there. That's your.
That's a sample of our brine. Trustee Kennedy and Trustee Kurzman, I have your samples in my office and I will share them with you. But that's an example of how a simple thing like adding a brine machine to our snow operations has dramatically reduced our salt load and has positively impacting the rivers and streams. So there are so many examples. that I could share with you. But you are already supporting us through the capital improvement programs, everything like our, the manpower and the equipment so that we can clean and televise our storm sewers and make sure they're operating, functioning well. You support Daniel Horan's sewer lining program, which makes sure that they're functioning. And then a lot of this is just staff driven. I mean, we go into schools and we talk about the importance of clean stormwater. And like I said, it really just is inclusive of everything we do in the village. So I could talk on and on about it, but I don't want to bore you.
Well, I just want to say that Bridget and Dan, I don't know how you do it all, especially this year. I mean, you have managed so many balls in the air and you've done it so gracefully. It just looks like you could do it in your sleep. And I'm sure that's not true. I'm sure it's really the result of a huge amount of effort and organization and dedication. And thank you to you and all your staff.
Thank you for your support.
Anytime you throw in a salt frying machine, it's just a way to my heart there. So, and Trustee Kurzman and Trustee Kane, wait till you get your gift of salt frying, like it's prominently displayed.
Just don't drink it, right?
Don't drink it.
So
it doesn't look edible.
Trustee Kurzman, any questions, thoughts? I mean, you obviously know this well and have experience with this.
Well, I had a couple of curiosity questions that were answered offline, so I'm good. Yeah, thank you.
All right, we're moving on to. Sorry, I got to get back. I think that's it for our action items this evening. So number 6 is any public comment. I do see some guests still online, so I'll make sure if anybody is online would like to make a public comment or address the Municipal Services Committee, now is your opportunity. Again, I go through it unofficially. If you're on Teams, unmute yourself or raise your hand and we'll make it open to everybody, or on phone, hit *6 to unmute yourself. We'll just give it a few seconds here. So I'll go slowly, go through the new one, the remaining, so we keep moving forward. But number 7, any old business? Nope. Any new business? Nope.
Well, if I guess maybe I'm just curious, just to finish up some of the conversation we had on the sidewalk policy. I'm just sort of curious, like, because this is under policy and procedures, I'm curious sort of if it were the will of this committee and or the board to address that, what would be the way to go about it?
Are you referring to the sidewalk policy?
Yes.
Well, Chair Sullivan, we could definitely add it to a future agenda, and a lot of the elements that we talked about today, staff could research, look at what other towns are doing, look at best practices for a sidewalk policy, and bring them to the committee for consideration.
That's what I was going to say. If we want to host another municipal services and add that, and maybe Trustee Kurzman, as you place them out to Bridget and team, that we can start to address. We can happily add that. It's probably not a bad thing to do anyways, just given the conversation we had with the bike plan and active transportation. So keep this moving forward. And I think it would just be a municipal service. That wouldn't be an additional, that doesn't need to go to a standing review or something from the board. We can just decide amongst the 3 of us, right, to add that?
That's correct.
I would certainly endorse that.
Absolutely. And I think what I heard is right now our policy is very resident driven versus something that is more proactive, where staff actually puts forth recommendations on how to fill the gaps and make it a more robust pedestrian system. I think Trustee Kurzman, you and I talked about that, really flipping it on its head and looking at it proactively rather than reactively when a resident brings an issue to us.
Yeah, I don't offer it with any particular location in mind. I just think that as a policy, it's time to rethink it.
So are you okay with us just finding a municipal services meeting time and scheduling it to bring that forward? Does that sound, that's one question.
Yeah, who are you addressing that to?
All right, trustee, I'm looking at trustee Kurzman. You can't tell?
Where is he on the screen now?
There's a story.
Yeah,
about-
he's the lower Brady. What's over here? So,
Well, yeah, so I guess I'm certainly, that's great to be able to discuss it at this level. I guess I was just curious, like, how does something like that get changed? You know, like, is that really just in the purview of this committee?
no, Richard, you can correct me. I think we can, my thinking is we would talk about any of the changes, work with Bridget and team to make any changes and address and adjustments that then would go to the village board for final approval, right?
I would think so, yeah.
Yeah, correct.
Well, I appreciate your receptivity to the idea. Both trustee Kennedy and Sullivan, thank you.
So the other question though is timing. Knowing that, you know, we're quickly heading into October 1st and I know we've got a lot of board budget meetings and everything. What sort of, do you think we can do this before, and do you want this before end of the year? That's for trustee Kurzman. And do you think we can do this before the end of the calendar year? I'm just, again, managing everybody's schedules.
I'm not sure that's practical, to be honest.
Well, I respect the workflow that you envision for the committee. It's your committee. But yeah, we do have a lot going on.
We don't have, Bridget, another municipal services meeting planned or needed before, right? Because I know we have a few committee of the wholes.
And then maybe a budget workshop.
Correct.
Right.
And then regular meetings.
And then
Yeah.
the regular, so.
If it's okay with the committee, I would suggest the first quarter of next year before construction starts. That would be a good time for staff to do the research and get preparation done for the committee. That's okay.
Maybe we target a January meeting, if that's okay.
Sure.
From the new year. That's a good suggestion. That work?
Yes.
Perfect.
Thank
Okay,
you, everybody.
that's good. So now I'll entertain, unless there's anything else, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
A second.
All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Bye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.